Hi, everyone. I'm Tara Donaldson, Executive Editor of WWD. I'm here today to discuss driving innovation through sustainability with our panelists Saskia van Gendt, Head of Sustainability at Rothys, and Susy Schöneberg, Founder and Head of Flexport.org. So I'd like to start with a question. People typically focus on certain areas of sustainability, whether it's recycled fibers or emissions reductions. But what are the key things to consider when you're really looking at sustainability across the end-to-end supply chain? How sustainable is the product if you've innovated at the fabric level, but not at the factory level?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm hopeful that we're transitioning from the era where companies were just focused on one attribute of sustainability. I think the word sustainability is getting a little bit muddied in what it means, and it can mean so many different things to so many different people. And Rothys is really focused on the things that are most impactful in our industry. And that for us is circularity and reducing our carbon footprint. But nested within those high level goals, we have a number of different initiatives that touch on much deeper into the supply chain. And we're seeing more of that in our industry, that there's a focus on circularity, and we're hopeful that we can be leaders in shifting that forward for the footwear industry. So our goal is to be circular in our production by 2023. That includes recycling initiative that we're working on this year, looking at reintroduction of recycled materials back into our product portfolio. But then nested within that, as I mentioned, is a focus on how we engage our suppliers, how we decarbonize our supply chain, how we look at our own manufacturing as a vehicle for reducing our carbon footprint. Then the next element that comes to mind for your question is what companies are doing versus what the customers may be aware of what those brands are doing. So there's such a need for deeper education and continuing to broaden what the customer knows about what Rothys is doing, what other brands are doing. So there's a focus on how do we transition from the customer that may know that Rothys is made from recycled plastic water bottles to the elements of our circular production that we're going forward with, as well as our carbon footprint mitigation. So thinking about brand videos that we can shine a light into some of our practices, going to these facilities, making it very transparent what our actions are. Those are ways that we can, over time, cultivate the customer's knowledge. So I think those are important ways. It's not just kind of putting these goals out, like our 2023 goal around circular production, but bringing the customer along and having those proof points and visual and video proof points to demonstrate how we're making progress towards those goals.
Susy, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm really impressed by how holistically Rothys thinks about sustainability. Oftentimes, companies only focus on their direct impact, but there are many other choices when you select a vendor, let's say for transporting your goods that are more indirect, but still contribute to your carbon footprint. So it's really important that companies focus on the direct, but also, let's say, indirect emissions that their kind of products and their business operations are causing.
Okay, so Saskia, you've been a proponent of the zero waste model and circularity at Rothys. What does that look like when you consider the entire supply chain? How are you eliminating waste beyond your product?
Yeah, the foundation of Rothys, and this is before I came into the brand, it's truly since day one. And the genesis of the idea of Rothys was to be better in how we were sourcing materials and producing. We own our own factory, and we're able to control waste in our production because we have vertical integration in our supply chain. So there's these really strong foundational elements that already allow us to eliminate waste. So one thing that is unique about how Rothys produces products is we don't have, let's say, one product line that is using recycled materials or one product line that is knit to shape so that we're able to eliminate waste in production. It's truly every product that we produce. So that foundation extends when we started with women's footwear, and then we launched bags last year and accessories. We were able to continue to use recycled materials and to use 3D knitting to eliminate waste in our production. So those foundational elements are really a benefit as we think about zero waste. And then going deeper into our supply chain, there's things that we hope to do in partnership with our industry. So this year we put together a sustainability council that are these incredible leaders, thought leaders in our industry that can help with this kind of brand collaboration. How do we not just have recycling for Rothys footwear, but how do we develop solutions that work for Rothys, but then bring in other brands and other partners within the necessary infrastructure to create something that can work with our entire industry. And our sustainability council is key to figuring out and to navigating that. So those are some of the elements that I would go back to. Is the foundation of zero waste is very much nested in how Rothys was built from the beginning. And I look to new solutions for recycling and how we can recover those materials. And then thinking about like, what is the need for broader collaboration in our industry so that these solutions that we've identified can operate at scale.
So there's obviously a lot of things to think about, and it can become pretty complex to create a circular model. Can you talk to us a little bit about the complexities of reverse logistics? What does a circular supply chain really demand?
Yeah, and we're trying to figure that out right now. And I think that's going to be one of the elements where we're going to need this cross-industry collaboration to figure that out. So when we announced our circular goals this year to be circular in our production by 2023, the milestone for 2021 was a recycling pilot where we can start to uncover what's needed to disassemble the shoe into its main components, take those materials and work with third parties to recycle them. So we're doing that at a very small scale so we can have those learnings for when we can broaden the number of shoes that we can recycle. And then this month, so October 18th, we are doing a pilot in stores where customers can drop off worn shoes for recycling. That will give us an indication of, how do we engage the customer to participate in this reverse logistics. We're lucky to have a couple of store locations where we can collect shoes and facilitate that reverse logistics. But truly, we need to figure out what does broader reverse logistics look like when we want to recover shoes from customers at large. So how do we use our website, which is truly our main store as a direct-to-consumer brand, as a way to recover shoes from the customer? And that's going to be the element that takes us from our pilot phase into our broader recycling program next year. And I think that, partners like Flexport and others that are much more knowledgeable around the holistic need for transportation as an element of reverse logistics, will continue to lean on these partners to figure out, like, how do we do this broader at scale?
So I just want to tap into something that you said about, getting the consumer to bring these things back. A lot of it will fall to them. What do you think it's going to take to have that mindset switch among the consumer? We see already that they're becoming increasingly conscious, but I've still sat in a room talking about organic cotton, and when asked, no one in the room was wearing organic cotton. And these are all people who are proponents of this and themselves consumers. So what do you think it's going to take for that switch, and kind of where are we on that path?
Yeah, I think you're right that we need, ultimately for the circular economy to work, we need truly customers, but everyone along the entire value chain to be engaged in solutions. But specific to customers, we, in this pilot that we're doing next week in store, where customers can drop off shoes, we're providing an incentive for them. So they get $20 off a same day purchase if they're bringing a pair of shoes in. And that's a real test and learn to understand, is that the right level of incentives for customers to be engaged in participating in this recycling program? We'll know by the number of pairs of shoes that are dropped off, the number of customers that are engaged. Getting some feedback directly from the customer, I think, is really critical to understand what it's going to take for them to want to create, not just on a one-off, but like on an ongoing basis, engagement with the circular economy by returning their shoes. So I think we do need to think about incentives, making it really easy. it should be as easy to participate in our recycling program as it is to buy a pair of shoes. So how do we use the back-end technology of our website, the infrastructure that allows the returns process to be really easy, tap into that to facilitate recycling. So I think we're quite lucky that we're in this time where all of that technology, and we can lean on that technology to facilitate participation and eliminate friction for customers to participate. And then hopefully over time, it'll be quite contagious for them to do that. We know that our customers are already talking to their friends and bragging about how they're wearing shoes made with recycled content. We hope that that kind of contagious energy will also happen around participating in the recycling program. So that word of mouth thing, I think, is also really powerful.
Okay, so turning to the transportation side of things, Susy, ocean freight players have been recently talking about switching to sustainable biofuels and reconsidering ship design. How are companies navigating sustainability on the transportation side of things?
That's a great question. And before I dive into what companies do, I think it's important to discuss why companies should care in the first place. Oftentimes, transportation can be a significant part of a company's carbon footprint. So it's really important to, first of all, start measuring your carbon footprint. And then historically, this hasn't been easy to do so because companies don't control directly how their freight might be transported. There might be certain data points that they're missing in order to calculate the carbon emissions correctly. So it's really important to first really partner with your freight provider or other kind of service providers to assess your carbon footprint so that you can see how important this activity is in regards to your whole carbon footprint. Then the second step is to reduce the carbon emissions. And there are different things a company can do. So first of all, you can look at the mode mix. So are you shipping primarily with air or via ocean? And then you should also think about who is providing those services to you. And this is where kind of the recent developments in ocean freight come in, right? It's really important to work with your suppliers to understand how your freight is managed and what you can change, given that you might have certain supply chain constraints, right? There might be certain days when your production is ready, you might have a certain launch. So there might be certain restrictions, but there are always things you can do. And lastly, for everything you can't reduce, because unfortunately, we still need to burn fuel to power the ships and planes, you can offset your carbon emissions or invest into carbon removal to be truly carbon neutral, even today. So although it will take us some time until we see those new technologies and until hopefully all of those ships are being powered by biofuel, there are steps that companies can take today in order to promote and make progress towards their zero emission goals.
Saskia, what's the approach Rothys has been taking with all of this?
So transportation, like a lot of product companies, is a significant part of our carbon footprint, and we are committed to being carbon neutral by 2023. So going after solutions that are decarbonizing our transportation is a critical element of that 3-year strategy that we put in place. I think one thing that we really value in working with Flexport is they have integrated these tools that make it really easy as a customer to go in, look at your per product transportation or per product carbon emissions or per month emissions. And they also make it very turnkey to invest in carbon offsets, which we do directly with them. So I think there's an element of like the ease at which Flexport makes it for companies who are interested in paying attention to their carbon footprint, calculating and measuring it, as Susy said, but also investing in these carbon solutions. And then I'm quite optimistic, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about it, but some of these emerging decarbonizing strategies, whether it be alternative fuels, renewable energy powered transportation, these are things that we'll need in order to truly enable the circular economy at large.
Okay, so we know we're living in a world where greenwashing is rampant. Saskia, how are you ensuring transparency when it comes to those you're working with? And then in turn, how are you being transparent with Rothys consumers?
Greenwashing is, as you said, rampant. And I think there's a couple of elements that are important principles to bring to conversations around transparency and eliminating greenwashing. The first is that greenwashing, it's almost like a short-term solution because if you're presenting untrue facts to your customers and then they find out that something that you're doing is not genuine, then you're eroding trust, and that consumer trust and that authenticity is critical to any sustainable brand. So I think greenwashing is a really like short-term strategy. And the transparency in being accurate around claims that you're producing or that you're communicating, practices that you're committing to, is really critical to enabling that trust between brands and consumers. So that's an important principle to put in place. And then one thing I alluded to earlier is like, how do we bring the customer along towards some of these goals that we put in place? So thinking about our 2023 goals to be circular in our production and carbon neutral, I don't want to just put a goal out there in 3 years and then not bring the customer along on how we're marching towards those goals, both the wins in what we're doing and also some of the learnings or kind of failures along the way. Those are really the important nuggets that can influence our progress and how we can collaborate more in the industry. So when we talk about our recycling pilot this year, yes, we're going to be celebrating some of the successes in recycling what we hope will be 20,000 pairs of shoes as a learning for how we scale recycling programs. But we'll also be talking about some of the challenges, like, some of the barriers to operating really quickly, some of the material constraints, some of the limitations and how we can recycle in a circular way. So I think those are really important, is not just celebrating the wins, but also bringing customers along and what can be better and how we can learn from things that aren't going well.
Susy, what are your thoughts on transparency?
I think what I find inspiring about Rothys' approach is that they also admit that they can't do everything by themselves. And that's the reason why they launched a network, right? And why they talk about collaboration. And I think that's really, really important. Climate change is a really complex problem. If we think about supply chains and decarbonizing supply chains, we all know that so many different players are involved. So it's impossible for one company alone to solve those challenges. And hence, it's really important to foster strong partnerships and really think about a collaborative standpoint in order to make progress towards our environmental and also social goals.
So, beyond what happens when a product is ready to ship, I know some brands are working with close-knit sourcing hubs where, the elastic producer and the apparel manufacturer are within a 5-mile radius, both to improve speed to market and also minimize the need for much transportation prior to shipping. Saskia, how do you address this at Rothys? And in particular, how might that have shifted in light of all the supply chain tie-ups brought upon by the pandemic?
Yeah, well, Rothys is a vertically integrated brand, meaning that we own our supply chain and own our own manufacturing. And that is truly a gift for some of the elements that you mentioned. So we're not sourcing one material in one place and having it treated in another country and then having it finished in another country and then yet again transporting it again to produce a final good. We're able to do that all under one roof. And that's really critical for eliminating transportation, but also the innovation and prototyping and speed and control of production. So we're working towards an on-demand production model where we're not overproducing because we have control over each of those stages. So one example is if a company is sourcing materials and finishing them in other places and then transporting them back, they don't really have the ability to control how much they're producing because there's, and you know this well from your work, that there's so much minimum order quantities and embedded production throughout each of those steps. So then you become kind of in this model of potentially overproduction. So I think there's a benefit to the vertical integration from an innovation standpoint, but also because we're able to eliminate waste in our production. And our new facility, we just moved to a new state-of-the-art facility. It's 320,000 square feet. And it allows us to look at not just the environmental side of our mission, but also the people side. And you asked about COVID, and I think a lot of our retail world was rocked by, what's happening within supply chains. We continue to see fluctuation in how materials can be sourced and how goods can be transported. But something that I always go back to is, because we own our own factory, and it's so important for us to have both the culture and people and community values as a company in every facility that we have, we could extend, that to the factory, and we weren't canceling orders through contract manufacturers and impacting the livelihoods of so many people deeper into the supply chain, because, that's our team and our facility, and we have responsibility for the people there. So the social side was really important, and, something that made a lot of us proud that we could continue to keep our community and people in value. And then the other piece that I think about within COVID is vertical integration, on-demand production, the knit to shape, and limiting our material waste truly built resilience in our supply chain. So we didn't see a lot of the fluctuations that other brands might have seen, because they're producing for an entire season, and then the demand for those products was truly cut off so quickly. So this idea of this sustainability built into our business model as a way to be more resilient and truly kind of eliminate waste and our supply chain is a benefit, a kind of side benefit of that.
I think some companies are still kind of lagging on the understanding that there is a business value to sustainability. Susy, can you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
Yes, I strongly believe that sustainable practices can drive the business result of any company, no matter if you started out and if you put sustainability at the core of your mission, or if this is something that is maybe new to your organization. And a good example is supplier relationships, as Saskia just described, because I feel if it's less transactional, but more a partnership, which is needed to implement sustainable practices, then you can also derive value in difficult times from this partnership, rather than just being a transactional partner. And we also see this in other areas related to the supply chain.
So Saskia, you mentioned the social impact side, and I think, the human element of the supply chain is what often gets sidelined in conversations about sustainability. But how should people be thinking about supporting those people who support the supply chain?
Yeah, I think so. There's sort of principles and practices that can be put in place, but I think there's also the kind of culture of a mission-driven brand that thinks about not just environmental practices because it might be relevant to the customer, but as we mitigate our carbon footprint, what is our responsibility for that within a global sense? So we know that the impacts of climate change will disproportionately affect the people that are least equipped and least responsible for producing emissions. So this idea of intersectional environmentalism and the importance of our environmental actions to improve the health and livelihood of all people, I think is a critical principle that we're seeing lots more discussion about, which I'm really optimistic about. But then on a very practical level, by owning our own factory, and we're looking towards something like LEED certification, zero waste certification, those principles, especially LEED certification and the green building practices, look at things like sourcing to improve indoor air quality, to improve natural light. So it's overall creating a much better working condition, in addition to reducing your emissions and energy use and water use. So this holistic view of creating a workplace that it supports those people's livelihoods. And then by owning our own factory and having control over how we operate and bring people in, we have a much lower turnover and higher retention rate than other companies in our space, mostly because we have extended leave practices and we value family practices. So we've had things like kids summer camp at the factory. And so I think that there's a way that you can extend the culture that you have as an organization to valuing the people within the facility. And then the last thing I'll touch on is deeper into the supply chain, having things in place like a code of conduct that ensures that there's environmental and social practices happening at facilities or sourcing that you have. So there's also practical things that you can do to make sure that the practices that you have as a company, mission-driven brand, is also extended to partners that you have.
So I want to talk a little bit about technology, because I think it's only recently that fashion is starting to play nice with technology. Susy, do you think technology is going to be really critical in driving sustainability forward?
Absolutely. I think for the longest time, doing supply chain work and working in logistics was rather invisible, and this has recently changed, not only due to the latest market conditions or the availability of technology, but I'm really excited to work in our industry because I believe by leveraging technology, we can make a significant impact. Logistics is one of the industries that is slowest to decarbonize, and we need those technology tools to change the trajectory. And the two reasons that I see for why technology plays such a big role is, one, we really have to measure the impact in order to take action that drives the needle. And so because in logistics, there's so many different players, it's important to leverage technology to gather all the information you need to assess your carbon emissions, and then to take impactful actions and take the right steps to reduce your carbon emissions. And secondly, because there are so many players involved, collaboration is key. We also know that in order to have a real impact, we have to deploy different strategies. So it might be offsets in the beginning, but then there are also many different carbon reduction strategies. And in order to manage those across so many different players, it's important that we bring everyone together, and technology provides the platform that we need in order to collaborate effectively.
So Saskia, where do we go from here? What do you think the true end-to-end supply chain sustainability will look like in the next 3 years, and what will it look like at Rothys?
Well, Rothys is going to be continuing to march on our 3-year plan. So we just this year announced our 2023 goals. So the goals are to be circular in our production and to be carbon neutral. And we will be marching forward to those by developing real solutions on the ground, collaborating across our industry to not just identify solutions that work for Rothys, but to create more circular infrastructure, circular materials and models for our industry at large. So the future looks like much more collaboration in order to create those solutions at scale, and also real proof points that can help be a magnet to pull the rest of the industry along. I think there's also a strong feeling of urgency within mission-driven brands to not just set like 2050 or 2040 goals, but to set 3-year goals around mitigating our carbon footprint. So we will definitely be continuing to accelerate our adoption of decarbonizing our supply chain, looking at real emission reductions, not just offsetting, but also offsetting where we need to. And kind of a mix, and I loved your question about technology, a mix of natural solutions and technology forward solutions that will allow us to invest in those most innovative carbon mitigation strategies. I think the urgency will drive a lot more acceleration of that. I'm hoping that we'll have national policy that advances that as well, more infrastructure to facilitate some of these carbon mitigation solutions, and then more customer demand for brands to act and to prove that they are the sustainable brands that they say they are.
I think that's a perfect note to end on. So Saskia, Susy, thank you so much for sharing your insights on this important topic.
Thanks so much. Great discussion.
Thank you.